I had barely pushed my apartment door open when two arms wrapped around me from behind. For half a second I froze, one hand still on the key, and the other holding my work bag. Then a woman's cheek pressed against my shoulder blade, and nearly all of her weight settled onto my back. "Don't leave me," she whispered. I recognized the voice a second before I recognized the perfume. Chloe Harris, the woman who lived directly across the hall from me, was apparently attached to my waist. "Chloe?" I turned my head as far as I could. "Are you okay?" She answered by taking one uncertain step forward, catching her foot against mine, and sending both of us through my open doorway. I hit the living room rug chest first and managed to catch myself on my forearms. Chloe landed almost entirely on top of me. Her small clutch bounced somewhere near the couch. One of the heels she had been carrying slid across the floor, and for several seconds I stayed exactly where I was because I could not figure out how to get up without throwing her off my back. "Okay," I said into the carpet. "This is a new neighbor situation." No answer. I turned my head. Chloe's face was resting between my shoulder blades, her eyes closed. "Chloe?" She made a quiet sound that could have meant anything. "You cannot fall asleep there." Another meaningless sound. My name is Ryan Walker. I was 31, and until that night my relationship with Chloe consisted mostly of holding the elevator, saying hello near the mailboxes, and once accepting a package for her when she was at work. Apparently, we had skipped several normal stages of friendship. I had noticed her when I stepped off the elevator, maybe 20 seconds earlier. She was walking toward our end of the hallway, in a dark satin dress, barefoot except for the heels hanging from one hand, with a tiny purse in the other. Her cheeks were flushed, and her steps were careful in the way people walk when they are trying very hard to prove they are not drunk. I knew she lived across from me, and saw no reason to interfere. She was almost home, still upright, and the last thing a woman coming back from a night out needed was her male neighbor asking questions, because he had decided she looked vulnerable. So I had walked past, nodded when she looked vaguely in my direction, and gone to my own door. That decision had lasted until she grabbed me from behind. Getting Chloe off the floor took longer than I expected. I managed to roll partly onto my side and sit up while keeping one arm behind her so she did not fall backward. Up close, it was obvious she was much more intoxicated than she had looked from the elevator. Her eyes opened when I said her name, but they did not seem interested in focusing. "Ryan," she said eventually. That was reassuring. At least she knew who I was. "Yes, Ryan." Across the hall, Chloe nodded as if I had delivered excellent news, then leaned against me and closed her eyes again. "Nope. Stay awake for another minute." I asked whether she could stand. She said, "Probably," with the confidence of someone who absolutely could not. I got her upright and walked her the 6 feet across the hallway to her apartment. She leaned heavily against my arm while I asked for her key. Chloe looked inside her clutch, moved around a lipstick, 2 cards, a receipt, and something wrapped in foil, then frowned. "Gone." I asked where it had gone. She looked at me with surprising seriousness. If I knew, it wouldn't be gone. Even drunk, apparently Chloe could win arguments. I checked the hallway floor and the area around the elevator while she stayed leaning against her door. Nothing. Her phone had 11% battery. I asked who she had been out with, and after some effort she gave me the name Vanessa. Chloe unlocked the phone herself, found the contact, and handed it to me. I called twice. No answer. I sent one short message saying Chloe was safely home but had lost her key, and asked Vanessa to call when she saw it. Our building management office had closed hours earlier. There was no overnight front desk, and the emergency maintenance number was for broken pipes and electrical failures, not adults who had misplaced apartment keys after cocktails. I considered getting Chloe a hotel room for about 3 seconds, before remembering that would involve putting her in a car, checking her into somewhere, while she could barely answer questions, and possibly leaving her alone in a place she did not recognize. She solved the debate by sliding slowly down her door until I caught her under the arms. "Right," I said, "my place." Back inside, I walked her toward my bedroom. She stopped halfway there and looked around as if she had just noticed the furniture. "This isn't mine." "Excellent. Progress." She frowned at me. "Mine's prettier." That feels unnecessary. I got her to sit on the edge of the bed, set her phone on the nightstand, and handed her a bottle of water. She managed 2 drinks before putting it down. I placed a small wastebasket beside the bed in case the night got worse and found a spare blanket. I did not help her change clothes, remove jewelry, or do anything else she was in no condition to agree to. The only thing I moved was the second heel still hanging from her hand because she had nearly rolled onto it. Within a minute she was asleep. I left the bedroom door partly open, plugged her phone into a charger where she could see it, and took a pillow and blanket to the couch. My alarm said it was after midnight. I should have been thinking about the morning shift schedule waiting for me at the distribution center, but instead, I kept replaying the moment at my doorway. Chloe's arms around me, her forehead against my back. Those 4 words spoken like they mattered. Don't leave me. There was an obvious temptation to wonder why a woman I barely knew had said that to me, but there was also an obvious answer. She was drunk, upset, and probably talking to a memory I knew nothing about. So I decided the sentence did not belong to me. The next thing I knew, daylight was coming through the blinds, and a woman's voice was demanding, "What are you doing in my apartment?" I opened my eyes and found Chloe standing several feet from the couch, still wearing last night's dress, hair completely disorganized, staring at me like she was deciding whether to scream. I looked around my living room, then back at her. "Chloe," I said carefully, "this is mine." For 3 full seconds, Chloe just stared at me. Then she looked past me at the kitchen, the couch, the television mounted on the wall, and finally, the framed photograph of my parents sitting on the shelf beside it. Her expression changed from alarm to confusion, then from confusion to something much worse. "Oh my God." She turned slowly toward the bedroom she had just walked out of. "This isn't my apartment." I pushed myself upright on the couch and rubbed one hand over my face. "That is what I've been trying to tell you." Chloe closed her eyes. "Please tell me I didn't break into your apartment." I glanced toward the front door. "Technically, you used me as the battering ram." That got her eyes open again. She looked down at the satin dress she was still wearing, then immediately checked herself, as if taking inventory. I could see the questions arriving faster than she wanted to ask them. Her face lost some color. "Ryan, what happened last night?" The humor disappeared from my voice. Nothing happened. I let that sit for a second before adding anything else. She needed that answer, but before she needed the embarrassing details. "You were drunk. You couldn't find your key. I tried calling your friend. You slept in the bedroom. I slept out here." Chloe looked at the blanket twisted around my legs, then back toward the bedroom. Some of the tension in her shoulders loosened, but she still looked horrified. I stood and picked up my phone from the coffee table. "You came down the hallway while I was opening my door. Then you grabbed me from behind." Chloe went completely still. "I did what?" I considered editing the story for her dignity, but there was no version of it that would survive more than 5 minutes. "You hugged me. Then you leaned into me, lost your balance, and we both went through the doorway." Her eyes widened. "I knocked you over?" "Very efficiently." I pointed at the rug. "I landed there. You landed on me." Chloe covered her face with both hands. "I'm moving." I almost laughed. "That seems expensive." "Another state, Ryan. Still expensive." She lowered her hands just enough to glare at me, but the embarrassment was starting to crack around the edges. That was probably better than panic. I told her about trying to get her back into her own apartment, her missing key, and the unanswered calls to Vanessa. Chloe remembered none of it. When I told her she had personally searched her clutch, she immediately grabbed it from the chair beside the door and checked again. No key. Her phone was sitting plugged into the charger on the small table nearby. She stared at it for a second, then at me. "You charged my phone? You had 11%. You know exactly how much? You made me call Vanessa twice." I became familiar with the situation. As if summoned by her name, the phone began vibrating. Chloe snatched it from the charger and answered. Vanessa's voice was loud enough that I could hear the first burst of frantic apology from across the room. Chloe stepped toward the kitchen while listening, then closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. After a short conversation, she hung up. "My key is in Vanessa's friend's car. I nodded. Mystery solved. Chloe looked miserable. She said I insisted I was fine to walk from the drop-off. You did make it all the way upstairs. Apparently my standards were low. You reached the correct floor. That deserves partial credit. She sat carefully on the edge of the armchair and looked around again, this time with less suspicion. That was when she noticed the bottle of water on the table, the unopened packet of pain reliever beside it, and the wastebasket I had moved out of the bedroom after waking up. Her eyes shifted toward the couch where I had slept. You really stayed out here all night? I shrugged. It's a couch. I've survived worse. She was quiet for a moment. You could just left me in the hallway. No, I answered before she could finish the thought. You could barely stand. Chloe looked down at her hands. You didn't have to deal with any of that. Probably not. But I wasn't going to lock my door and hope you figured it out. Something in her expression changed then. It was subtle, but I saw it. Until that moment, she had been focused almost entirely on how humiliating the night had been for her. Now she was thinking about what the night had required from me. I did not want that turning into some giant debt between us, so I walked into the kitchen and started the coffee maker. Coffee? I asked. Chloe looked almost offended by how normal the question sounded. You're offering me coffee after I assaulted you with my entire body? I think assault requires intent. I tackled you. You hugged me first. The tackle was more of a structural failure. She laughed, finally, although she immediately regretted it and pressed a hand to her forehead. I poured 2 mugs and handed her one. For a few minutes we stood in my kitchen drinking coffee. Like this was an ordinary Saturday morning, and not the strangest conversation we had ever had. Chloe apologized twice more. I stopped the 3rd attempt. You're safe. Nothing happened. Vanessa found your key. We can call the case closed. She nodded, but she did not leave. Instead, she stared into her coffee and asked, more carefully this time, did I say anything? I knew immediately what she meant. I could have repeated the exact words and watched her die of embarrassment, but something about the way she asked told me this was not funny anymore. One thing, I said. Chloe slowly looked up. Was it bad? No. I rested my mug against the counter. Just personal. Her eyebrows pulled together. What did I say? I hesitated. You said, don't leave me. Chloe stopped breathing for a second. There was no recognition in her face at first, only confusion. Then something flickered behind her eyes, too quick for me to identify. She looked away. I added, you were drunk. I'm pretty sure it wasn't meant for me. Chloe nodded, but not convincingly. Right. She finished the coffee faster than she needed to, thanked me again, and collected her clutch and shoes. At the door, she paused with one hand on the handle. For the first time since waking up, she looked directly at me without embarrassment or panic. Ryan? Yeah? She seemed about to ask something, then changed her mind. Nothing. I'll bring the mug back. She stepped into the hallway and crossed the few feet toward her own door, just as the elevator opened, and Vanessa appeared holding a key ring above her head like she'd recovered stolen treasure. Chloe took it, unlocked her apartment, and disappeared inside, after one last glance in my direction. I closed my door and looked down at the empty space where she had been standing. For the first time, I wondered whether "Don't Leave Me" had really belonged to someone else. For the next 2 days, Chloe became remarkably good at living 6 feet away from me without actually seeing me. I noticed it because before Saturday morning, I had never paid attention to when her door opened or closed. Now, if I stepped into the hallway and heard movement behind her door, there would sometimes be a suspicious pause before she came out. Once I caught the elevator just as the doors were closing and saw her through the narrowing gap, standing inside with a grocery bag against her chest. Our eyes met. She gave me an apologetic little wave instead of stopping the elevator. I laughed all the way down to the parking garage. I understood why she was avoiding me, though, so I let her. I did not knock on her door, did not bring up Friday night, and definitely did not remind her that she had wrapped herself around me and begged me not to leave. Whatever happened next between us, if anything happened at all, needed to belong to the Chloe who could remember it. On Tuesday morning, avoidance finally became impossible. I stepped into the elevator on my way to work and found her already inside, dressed for the office, with her hair pulled back and a travel mug in one hand. She looked completely composed until she saw me. Then her eyes dropped immediately to the key ring looped around one finger. I looked at it too. Got one this time? Chloe stared at me for a second, then laughed despite herself. I hate that this is going to be a thing. The elevator started moving. Only if you lose it again. That small exchange seemed to release something. By the time we reached the lobby, she was walking beside me, instead of half a step ahead. And when we separated near the entrance, she actually told me to have a good day. Without looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her, that evening someone knocked on my door. Chloe was standing there, holding 2 coffees. She lifted one toward me before I could say anything. Peace offering. I leaned against the frame. For what? The tackle or accusing me of breaking into my own apartment? Her mouth twisted. Can I combine them? I took the coffee, mostly because turning it down would have made this more awkward than accepting it. I told her she had already thanked me enough. Chloe nodded, but she did not leave. For a few seconds, she just stood there looking past me into the apartment, where she had spent the most embarrassing night of her recent life. Then she asked how late I usually worked. It was such an ordinary question that it caught me off guard. I answered, asked about her job, and somehow we spent 15 minutes standing in our respective doorways, talking about work schedules, bad office coffee, and the neighbor on the 3rd floor who apparently treated the laundry room like private property. None of it mattered. The important part was that Chloe had stopped trying to escape. 2 nights later, I came home carrying takeout from a Thai place a few blocks away. Chloe was unlocking her door at the same time, thankfully with a key. She glanced at the bag in my hand and said, whatever I had smelled better than the frozen pasta waiting in her freezer. I could have said goodnight and gone inside. Instead, I heard myself ask, want some? Chloe looked surprised, and I realized it was the first time since that night that I had deliberately extended an interaction, instead of simply allowing one. She smiled. Only if you're sure I'm allowed inside while sober. I'm actually hoping that improves the experience. We ate at the small table beside my kitchen, rather than on the couch. And for the first time, I got to know the version of Chloe that had nothing to do with a satin dress, missing keys, or a hangover. She was quick with a joke, opinionated about food, and much more competitive than I expected. A harmless disagreement about whether a nearby coffee shop was overrated somehow turned into her pulling up reviews on her phone, like she was preparing a legal case. Eventually, the conversation slowed. She turned her water glass between her fingers and told me she had figured out why that night had hit her so hard. She had been expecting an internal promotion at work, one she had spent months preparing for, and had learned Friday afternoon that the company gave it to someone from another department. That alone would have been disappointing. The same week, one of her closest friends had told her she was moving across the country. Vanessa had convinced Chloe to go out instead of sitting alone in her apartment, thinking about both things. Chloe admitted she had tried much too hard to stop thinking. I did not ask whether "Don't Leave Me" had been about the friend, the promotion, or something older than either of them. Chloe seemed to expect the question anyway. I still don't know why I said that to you. I set my fork down. You don't have to make it mean something. She looked at me. You really don't care? I care that you were upset. I don't think a drunk sentence needs an investigation. Chloe watched me long enough that I became aware of how quiet the apartment had gotten. Then she smiled, smaller than usual. You're annoyingly reasonable. I told her that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me all week. After that, the conversation became easier again, but something had shifted underneath it. Chloe stopped treating the night she stayed over like a disaster she needed to repair. She started teasing me instead. She learned that I had worked at the distribution company for 6 years and supervised the evening operations team, which explained why my schedule occasionally looked ridiculous. I learned she worked in marketing for a regional retail company and secretly hated networking events, despite being very good at them. At some point, she leaned back in her chair and said it was strange that we had lived across from each other for almost a year without knowing any of this. I told her our old system had been efficient. And now? She asked. I looked at the empty takeout containers between us. Now you're eating half my dinner. She smiled like she had expected a different answer, but liked that one anyway. A little later, she asked whether I was seeing anyone. The question arrived casually enough that I almost answered casually. Then I noticed she was watching me instead of the table. No, I said. I waited a beat. You? Chloe shook her head. No, that was all. Neither of us turned it into a confession or a moment bigger than it was. But after she went back across the hall, I stood in my kitchen cleaning 2 plates and realized I was smiling for no useful reason. Until then, I had been careful not to interpret Chloe's attention as anything more than gratitude. The problem was that gratitude had already been paid. She had apologized, brought coffee, explained the night, and recovered her key. There was no practical reason left for her to keep finding me. The answer came 3 nights later when someone knocked just after 8. I opened the door and found Chloe standing there in jeans and a soft gray sweater, empty-handed. No coffee, no mug, no package, no emergency. I looked down theatrically at her hands, then back at her. What's the excuse tonight? Chloe bit back a smile. I ran out. She held my gaze for another second before asking, "Can I come in anyway?" I stepped aside, and Chloe walked into my apartment like she had done it 100 times instead of twice. The difference was that this time she was completely sober, fully aware of where she was, and carrying absolutely no excuse for being there. She looked around the living room, then at me. You look disappointed. I closed the door. I was expecting at least a package you could pretend got delivered to the wrong apartment, she smiled. I considered bringing my own mail. That would been commitment. Chloe sat on the end of the couch and tucked one leg underneath herself. There was something strangely comfortable about watching her settle into the same room where, less than 2 weeks earlier, she had landed on my back and gone to sleep. The embarrassment that had once filled every conversation between us had almost disappeared. In its place was something much harder to misunderstand. We talked for nearly an hour without needing a reason. Chloe told me about a presentation at work that had gone better than expected. I complained about one of my drivers calling out 20 minutes before a shift. Somewhere in the middle of it, she opened my refrigerator without asking, looked inside, and told me I had the groceries of a divorced father, despite never having been married. I told her she was becoming very comfortable criticizing a man in his own home. You let me sleep here before you knew my middle name, she said. The standards were already low. That stopped me for half a second, because it was funny, but also because it reminded me just how strange the route between us had been. Eventually, Chloe leaned back against the couch and looked toward my front door. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Why haven't you ever knocked on my door? The question was simple enough, but there was no joking in the way she asked it. I knew exactly what she meant. She had brought coffee. She had stayed to talk. She had accepted dinner. She had come over tonight with no excuse at all. I had enjoyed every minute of it, yet almost every new step had started with her, because the first real interaction we had happened when you were drunk, I said. I didn't want you waking up one morning, realizing I'd turned that into some reason to keep showing up at your place, and feeling like you owed me attention because I helped you. Chloe watched me quietly. I added, if you wanted distance after that night, you deserved to have it. Her expression softened, but she did not look away. Ryan, that night was embarrassing. It was not a contract. I know, and I stopped being embarrassed days ago. I smiled slightly. That quickly? Mostly. She pointed at me. You keep bringing up the tackle, so recovery has been slower than necessary. Then her hand dropped and her tone changed. But when I knock now, I'm not thanking you. I'm not trying to fix anything. I'm here because I want to be here. She let the sentence sit between us. There was nothing accidental about it. Nothing clouded by alcohol or confusion. Chloe was looking directly at me, completely sober, and giving me the one thing I had refused to assume. I could have moved closer. I could have kissed her right then. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I smiled and said, good to know. Chloe narrowed her eyes. That's all I get? For now. She laughed, but I could see the challenge in her expression. The rest of the evening stayed easy. We talked until almost 10, and when she finally stood to leave, I walked her the few steps to the door. Chloe paused in the hallway, looked at her own apartment, then back at me. You know, you're eventually going to have to cross this hallway voluntarily. I've crossed it before. Returning a drunk woman doesn't count. That feels unfair. It was physically demanding. Chloe shook her head, smiled, and went home. She did not knock the next night, or the night after that. Nothing dramatic happened. She did not suddenly become cold, and when we crossed paths on the way to work, she still smiled and said hello, but she stopped inventing reasons to appear at my door. By the third evening, I caught myself looking up every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. By the fourth, I realized I had become used to seeing her standing outside my apartment. That realization was useful because it forced me to admit something I had been carefully labeling as caution. I was not waiting for more proof. I already had it. Chloe had practically told me she wanted me to do something. Continuing to stand still was no longer respectful. It was just passive. On Friday evening, I got home earlier than usual, changed out of my work clothes, and stood in my kitchen for 10 minutes pretending I needed to decide whether I was really going to do this. Then, I picked up my keys, crossed 6 feet of hallway, and knocked. Chloe opened the door wearing jeans and a dark green top, her hair still slightly damp from a shower. Her eyebrows rose when she saw me. Well, look who found my apartment. I held up my key ring. I brought these in case things got confusing. She laughed. Very responsible. I put the keys back in my pocket. Are you doing anything tonight? Chloe studied me for half a second, clearly enjoying the fact that I was finally the one standing at her door. Depends on whether you're asking me to split takeout again or actually asking me out. There was no point pretending I did not understand the distinction. Dinner. Somewhere neither of us lives. A date. Her smile arrived slowly. That took you long enough. An hour later, we were sitting across from each other in a small neighborhood restaurant. I had passed dozens of times but never entered. Chloe looked different from the woman who had stumbled down our hallway in a satin dress, but not because she was less polished. She had dressed for tonight too. The difference was that now she was completely present. Every smile, every question, every time her eyes stayed on mine belonged to this moment. There was no uncertainty to hide behind. We talked about things that had nothing to do with the night she lost her key. Chloe told me she had once seriously considered moving to Chicago because she thought adulthood required at least one impulsive relocation. I told her I had once applied for a management job in another state and withdrawn the application before the interview because I realized I was chasing a title I did not actually want. She told me that was either mature or boring. I told her both could be true. By dessert, whatever line had existed between neighbor and date had disappeared. Chloe rested her forearms on the table and said, "Can I tell you something without y'all making it weird? That depends entirely on what it is. I started seeing you differently the morning I woke up in your apartment." I said nothing, so she continued. "Not because I woke up in your bed. Because you were on the couch." Her eyes stayed on mine. "But I didn't start liking you because of that. That came later." I felt myself smile. "Good. Because I didn't start believing you liked me until you ran out of reasons to thank me and kept showing up anyway." Chloe leaned back. "So you did notice. Eventually, you're slow, careful, slowly careful." When we got back to our floor, the hallway felt shorter than usual. Chloe stopped in front of her door and turned toward me. For once, neither of us made a joke about keys. She looked up at me, close enough that I could smell the faint perfume I had first noticed when her arms wrapped around me from behind. This time there was no alcohol on her breath, no unsteady balance, no confusion about where she was. I moved closer slowly enough to give her every chance to change her mind. She did not. Chloe closed the remaining distance herself, and I kissed her. It was brief at first, almost careful. Then she smiled against my mouth and kissed me again. When we separated, neither of us said anything for a second. Chloe finally looked toward my apartment across the hall. "You know, this is significantly better than our first attempt at physical contact." I laughed. Nobody hit the floor. Growth. I said goodnight and started toward my door. Halfway across the hallway, I glanced back. Chloe was still standing there watching me. For one strange second, the scene felt familiar. Same hallway. Same two doors. Same woman behind me. But this time she was steady on her feet, smiling, and completely aware of everything that had happened. "Good night, Ryan," she said. "Good night, Chloe." I went inside knowing that 6 feet of hallway had somehow become the most interesting distance in my life. After that first date, something changed without either of us needing to announce it. Chloe still lived 6 feet away from me, and I still woke up early for work, while she usually left a little later. But the hallway stopped feeling like neutral territory. If I heard her door open while I was locking mine, I waited instead of pretending I had not noticed. If she came home carrying too many grocery bags, I took half without asking. More importantly, I started knocking on her door too. I did not want whatever this was becoming to depend on Chloe always being the one who crossed the hallway first. A week after our date, I knocked on her door with 2 coffees before work. Chloe opened it wearing one shoe and holding an earring between her teeth. She looked at the cups, then at me. "Are you thanking me for something now?" I handed her one. "No. I wanted coffee and assumed you would steal some eventually." She removed the earring from her mouth. "That is technically thoughtful. Don't tell anyone." She took the cup, checked her purse, then patted both pockets of her coat. I watched her for a second. "Keys?" Chloe froze, glared at me, and reached back inside for them. "You saw nothing." "I saw history trying to repeat itself." She pushed past me toward the elevator. "Keep talking and I'm changing floors." The joke should have gotten old, but somehow it did not. Maybe because it no longer reminded her of humiliation. It had become ours. Every time Chloe lifted her keys before closing her door, she did it with exaggerated seriousness. Every time I asked if she had them, she rolled her eyes like she hated me for it. She never actually stopped smiling. We did not suddenly spend every night together. That mattered to me. Chloe had her friends, her work, her routines. I had mine. Some evenings we ate together. Some nights we only talked for 5 minutes in the hallway before disappearing into our separate apartments. Once, I came home exhausted after a shift that had gone completely sideways and found a paper bag hanging from my doorknob with dinner inside and a note that said, "You looked like a man who was going to eat cereal." I knocked across the hall and asked how she knew. Chloe opened her door and looked at me like the answer was obvious. "You have a cereal face." Another night, Chloe invited Vanessa over, and I finally met the woman whose unanswered phone had helped create the entire disaster. Vanessa looked at me for approximately 3 seconds before saying, "So you're the couch guy." Chloe nearly choked on her drink. I looked at her. The couch guy? I may have summarized the night. Vanessa immediately held up both hands. For the record, I also confirmed that the key really was in the car. I was not ignoring her on purpose. Chloe pointed at her. "You ignored 2 calls." I was asleep. Convenient. Vanessa looked between us, smiled like she understood more than either of us wanted discussed, and wisely changed the subject. A few weeks later, Chloe told me she had been asked to lead a new regional marketing project. It was not the promotion she had lost, and she made a point of saying that before I could congratulate her too much. "I still think they made the wrong call," she said, sitting across from me at her kitchen counter. "But this project is mine. No title change. No dramatic life transformation. Just something good." I raised my glass. "Something good counts." She smiled and tapped hers against mine. I liked that she was happy for herself. I liked even more that the future she was building had nothing to do with needing me to rescue it. By then, we had been seeing each other long enough that the first night felt almost ridiculous when I thought about it. Chloe no longer belonged in my memory as the woman in a satin dress who could barely stand. She was the woman who stole the crispy pieces from my takeout, argued with navigation apps, hated folding laundry, and somehow remembered exactly which days I had late shifts. She was also the woman who would cross the hallway just to sit beside me for 20 minutes because she wanted my company. That part got to me more than I expected. She did not need anything fixed. She did not need help getting home. Most of the time, she did not need anything at all. She just wanted to be there. One Friday night, I went to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time we had spent an entire evening on her side of the hallway, and I finally understood why she had said her place was prettier while she was drunk. It was. She had plants that were somehow still alive, framed prints on the walls, and actual matching furniture instead of the collection of practical objects I had accumulated over the years. Chloe caught me looking around and said, "See? I never disagreed. You absolutely sounded offended. You insulted my apartment while I was trying to keep you conscious." I was honest under pressure. We ate, talked, and ended up watching half a movie neither of us cared about, because we spent more time commenting on it than paying attention. There was nothing dramatic about the evening, and that was exactly why I liked it. No missing keys, no emotional crisis, no awkward explanation waiting in the background. Just Chloe leaning against me on the couch, laughing when I predicted the movie ending 20 minutes too early. Eventually I checked the time and saw it was almost midnight. "I should go," I said. "I'm in at 7 tomorrow." Chloe sat up, responsible adult, occasionally. She walked me to the door, and I kissed her before stepping into the hallway. My apartment was directly across from hers. 6 feet, maybe 7, if you measured diagonally. I had crossed that distance hundreds of times without thinking about it. That night I made it halfway before Chloe said my name, Ryan. I turned. She was still standing in her doorway, one hand resting against the frame. Her expression had changed. Not sad. Not nervous exactly. Just softer. "Yeah?" Chloe looked straight at me. "Don't leave me." For a second neither of us moved. I knew she remembered it too. The same hallway, the same doors, the same words. Except this time there was no satin dress hanging crooked from one shoulder, no missing shoe, no unfocused eyes. Chloe was barefoot because she was home, completely sober, completely steady, and smiling just enough to tell me she knew exactly what she had done. I took one step toward her. She added, "This time I mean you." That got me. Not because I had been waiting for her to repeat those words. I had stopped needing an explanation for them weeks ago. What hit me was the difference between the two moments. The first time, Chloe had grabbed onto whoever happened to be there because she was hurt, drunk, and afraid of being left alone. Tonight she was doing the opposite. She was choosing someone while she was clear enough to know exactly who she wanted. I crossed the rest of the hallway. Before I stepped inside, I looked at the door number above her shoulder. "You sure this is your apartment?" Chloe stared at me. I nodded toward her hand. "Just checking." She reached into the pocket of her sweatpants, pulled out her keys and shook them in front of my face. "I have the key." I checked. "Good. Are you coming inside or conducting a safety inspection?" I smiled and followed her in. A month earlier, I had carried Chloe into my apartment because she had nowhere safe to sleep. Now I stayed in hers because she wanted me there, and because I wanted to stay. There was a difference between being needed in a bad moment and being chosen in an ordinary one. It took me a while to understand that the second one mattered more. The strangest part is that the sentence I remembered most from that first night ended up meaning almost nothing until Chloe said it again. Drunk words had introduced us, but they had not built anything between us. What mattered were all the sober choices afterward, hers and mine, until two people who had lived across the hall from each other for almost a year finally stopped acting like strangers. If your neighbor woke up in your apartment after a night like that, do you think you could ever go back to simply saying hello in the hallway? If you enjoyed the story, leave your answer in the comments and subscribe for more.
The thing I kept coming back to with Ryan and Chloe is how easily this story could have become uncomfortable if Ryan had handled that first night differently. Chloe was drunk, emotional, barely able to stand, and she said something that sounded incredibly personal. I think a lot of people would have immediately started wondering whether "don't leave me" secretly meant she had feelings for him, but Ryan basically refused to make that assumption, and I really respected that. He helped her because she needed help. That was it. He didn't treat the fact that she slept in his apartment like some romantic opening. And he didn't use what she said while drunk as permission to start pursuing her the next morning. I actually think that decision is what made the romance believable later, because Chloe got the chance to come back to him completely sober and decide for herself whether she wanted to be around him. And I liked how awkward she was afterward because, honestly, imagine waking up in your neighbor's apartment, realizing you tackled him into his own living room, slept in his bed while he took the couch, and then finding out you whispered, "Don't leave me." I would probably start checking rental prices in another state too. But once the embarrassment wore off, I think the story got much more interesting. Chloe kept coming back even after there was nothing left to apologize for. The coffee made sense once. The thank you made sense once. After that, she was just finding reasons to be around Ryan because she liked him, and I think Ryan knew that before he was willing to admit it. That's where I started getting a little frustrated with him. His caution made complete sense at first. It would have been pretty questionable if he had immediately turned that vulnerable night into a dating opportunity. But once Chloe was sober, showing up voluntarily, asking whether he was seeing anyone, and eventually telling him directly that she was there because she wanted to be there, Ryan didn't really need more proof. At that point, he wasn't protecting Chloe anymore. He was protecting himself from the possibility of getting it wrong. And I like that Chloe eventually stopped crossing the hallway for him. She didn't make a scene and she didn't suddenly start playing games. She just stopped doing all the approaching and let Ryan discover whether he actually missed her enough to move. Apparently 6 feet can feel pretty far when you're the one who finally has to cross it. The ending also worked for me because bringing back "Don't Leave Me" could have been really cheesy if the story hadn't earned it. But I think it did. The first time Chloe said it, Ryan had no idea whether those words were even meant for him, and honestly neither did Chloe. The second time she was completely sober, standing in her own doorway, looking directly at him, and then she basically clarified, "No, this time I mean you." That completely changes the sentence. The first one was about needing someone in a bad moment. The second one was about choosing someone when nothing was wrong. And I think that difference is probably the strongest part of the whole story for me. So I'm curious where you guys land on Ryan. Do you think he handled this exactly the right way by waiting until Chloe made her sober intentions completely clear? Or do you think once she literally told him she wanted to be there, he was being way too cautious? And also, be honest, if you woke up after a night like Chloe's and realized your attractive neighbor had seen the entire disaster, are you bringing him coffee the next day, or are you moving buildings?